Hi, I'm Jeff Sharon from UCF Sports Night. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
Today's participants are Robin Roberts, and Key Francis. We join the conversation in the Faculty Lounge.
Where were the auditors and what were they doing and why weren't they doing their job? And so I think it's this, it really is a job in my auditing classes. For example, I talk about auditors as needing two characteristics. They have to be competent and trustworthy. Competence means they understand all these intricate rules, you know, and can apply those rules in different situations. And trustworthy just means that, you know, third parties who are looking at their reports can rely on them to tell the truth about what they found. And it's, you know, it's a requirement of a profession that sort of is built on selling its integrity. And when that's what you're selling and you sort of get that questioned, then you find it in the newspapers all the time.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the whole idea of ethics, I think, springs back to the sort of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Sure.
And I think, you know, when you begin to build on that, there's, you know, I gave that some thought when we were talking about what is the other, you know, is the other, how do you determine who the other is in a business? And how does that affect really, I know you're the endowed chair for the Burnett chair, and your research is based on a lot of these things. And where does that go?
All right. Well, defining the other is something that really there's quite a bit of research on. One theory that I've used in some of my research is called Stakeholder Theory, and it's meant to contrast stockholder theory, you know, which means that a business needs to be a part of society. They need to have a broader set of stakeholders. So you look at stakeholders being the community, the employees, the ultimate customer, not just the investor who's invested the money with you, but all of the different parties that sort of help in the survival of that company. So and the environment certainly has a stake in how a business operates. And so you know, stakeholder theory in accounting has really become a part of the discipline and a way to try to broaden who we call the other, you know, when we're making business decisions.
Well, you mentioned you were going to India
That's
to
right.
do some research on different attitudes and how perhaps different philosophies come into play in the business and accounting area.
Yeah, I have two sort of current projects that are sort of large-scale projects that I'm working on. And one is has to do with the outsourcing of business processes. And that seems to be a hot topic politically right now. You'll hear John Kerry and George Bush talk about that. And it really has to do with, again, that search for being as cost minimizing and efficient as a business can be. And we found that technology has made, you know, a person 6,000 miles away just as accessible as a person in the cubicle next door almost. And so over the last few years, it's become very popular to seek globally the lowest cost providers of some of your business services. Used to be textiles. Now it's tax preparers, information technology specialists, radiologists, and it really will, I think, have a huge impact on the careers that you know, our children and grandchildren can have in the U.S. So there's a balance that I think has to be considered. You know, I care about the well-being of global society. So I want to go hear from these outsourcing firms and the people that work for those, their side of the story for outsourcing, and put that in some global business perspectives.
Well, I think the academic institutions are in a unique position to look at that with some perspective. I think I know in the arts and animation industry, for instance, so there's a lot of outsourcing of animation to third world countries and to other countries that are equipped to do that technologically. And I think it's harder to look at that in a fair way if you're not in an academic institution. It's almost too close to home to get a perspective. Do you feel that going there from an academic institution and writing about this in your papers and things from an academic point of view is maybe a little bit ahead of the times over the cultural perspective?
I would hope so. You know, I mean, that's sort of, I'm trying to advance knowledge, you know. Now this is social science knowledge, and there's always a political perspective, I think, to much of what gets done. One of the reasons that I was motivated to do the work was there were some sort of local outsourcing that took place with some of the large corporations located in Orlando, and students that we were graduating out of the School of Accounting were ending up losing their positions as these companies outsource their jobs. And I thought, you know, just sort of personally felt worried and concerned about those students. Then I talked to a colleague from India, and he talked about all the wonderful things that were happening to the people there as a result of having these jobs outsourced. And so trying to understand it globally, how can we help, you know, provide better lives for our own citizens and for other citizens around the globe.
Well, I think, you know, to an uninformed person, I think the idea of going to college to learn accounting probably doesn't take into consideration the philosophical and social and political courses that one would be required to take, and that most of your majors probably do take as electives. You want to tell me a little bit about how those two things work?
Well, it's there is a huge technical component, you know, to accounting, and I think people that come into accounting, I always say that some of our best students are the ones that decided not to be engineers. You know, I mean, they have this very great predisposition to work with numbers, and they like numbers. And in accounting, you just put dollar signs in front of them and work some different equations. But then when they get into the subject matter, they start realizing how much judgment's involved. You know, you've heard jokes, you know, like, you know, you ask the CPA what's 2 + 2, and they say, what do you want it to be? You know, and you know, you realize then the ethical side and the judgment side of that. When I teach my undergraduate auditing class, one of the first things I do is actually put up a drawing that my daughter made when she was 4 years old, and I asked the students to describe what they're seeing. You know, and of course, she was small, so they have a lot of trouble trying to figure out. But then they come to this conclusion that, you know, someone was sick and there were flowers by the bed, and you know, and so then the next thing I put on the transparency is a balance sheet for Walmart. You know, I say, okay, now what is this picture trying to tell? You know, and then I point out that you take a company like Walmart and, you know, billions of dollars, hundreds of locations, and it's the job of the accountant to boil it down to, you know, three sheets of paper: a balance sheet, an income statement, and a statement of cash flows that condenses everything they did, you know, into 3 sheets, and that it's as much of an art as it is a science.
Yeah, well, I think one of the great things about being at an academic institution is, I think, the preconceptions you have about professions and training and a variety of skills is that you find that most of those preconceptions are just that. They're preconceptions and aren't really based in reality. I mean, certainly artists get nailed for not being very good with money, and the ones that survive are very good with money. And, you know, accountants, I think, you know, you have the idea that they're not very astute when it comes to humanity issues and humanitarian issues, things like that. But I think when you get in an institution and you actually have time to meet with people, you find they have wide-ranging interests. Your students that come in generally, do they come in with a wide-ranging group of interests, and then you have to help them get focused, or is it really more an expansive process.
Right. It's basically the first year of, let's say, a PhD program in accounting has to do with introducing the student to really the different research methods that are available. Usually there's like, accounting research spans 3 different root disciplines, what I call them. There's the economic discipline, where people study like changes in the prices of stock and how accounting information impacts the stock market. Then there's a bulk of research in psychology that looks at how accounting is used to help people make business decisions and kinds of like, anchoring and adjustment problems or cognitive biases that people have, why they might, spend good money, chasing bad, they ignore sunk costs or something like that. And then there's also a sociology or political science side that looks at, how society and accounting sort of go hand in hand in terms of, things like taxation, public policy, and things like that. And the students usually come into this program thinking, boy, I want to teach accounting. It's not like chemistry where they've been in the lab ever since they took their first chemistry class. They spend a lot of time learning those institutional details, the principles and the auditing standards. And so it really is an expansion is what happens that first year.
Do you think the students are primarily more extroverted or generally introverted people?
You think about an accountant probably being an introvert, that they like to sit at their cubicle at the desk with the numbers. And I've found that it's often that the student that comes back and they say they want to teach accounting, it's actually because they have a little bit of extrovert in them, and they've missed being with people, interacting with people. The front of the classroom is about as close to a stage as they get, and so that seems to be part of the excitement that drives them there. The other thing that you find is that they're almost all very curious. They come from their work lives with all these questions. I kept wondering why, my business manager, kept wanting me to perform this task. Or I remember how everybody felt when they were given a revised budget that was much tighter than they needed to accomplish what they thought needed to be accomplished in their unit. And so those questions end up, driving their own research efforts.
Which I think brings me to an interesting point of a question that I'd like to ask you, which is, I know that a large part of your assignment as the endowed chair is research. Is that primarily a funded research, or is that research that's just driven by your own personal curiosity and desire to expand knowledge?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's the second, and that's one of the best sort of aspects of having an endowed chair position is that they attract people into these positions. They set you up not only with your salary but with some budget funds that allow you to do things like travel to India to interview these executives of these outsourcing firms. And so it really is a curiosity that can drive your research. There's practical applications to that eventually. I've done public policy work that looks at how the public accounting profession interacts with legislators at the state level and at the Congress level to enact laws about CPA licensing, about legal liability issues and auditor independence issues. And so, I remember during the auditor independence hearings, this was all about Sarbanes-Oxley Act that maybe you hear about, and the phone rang and it was this conference call, and there was people who were doing some work for a senator, and they said, we're trying to get a handle on this auditor independence issue. What's this deal? And I thought, well, they should probably know, but I'll explain. So I told them there are these 2 theories: a conflict of interest theory, which says if an auditor's doing a bunch of consulting and getting paid a bunch of money, they could compromise their independent thinking when they do the audit.
Right.
And the other theory is what they call the spillover theory, which says if you're doing all this consulting, you get to know the client really well, and you can actually do a better job auditing. Well, when I mentioned the spillover theory, they said, "Ooh, we like that theory. Now that is a good theory." And it was you quickly knew what side of the house they were working for,
right?
Because there were particular legislators who were pushing to allow auditors to keep doing their consulting and keep doing their auditing for the same clients.
Right.
at the end of the day, they lost that battle, and now auditing and consulting's been separated.
Well, I think, in the arts as well, and as in the business world, I think there is the search for sort of a pure aesthetic, a pure knowledge, and then there's the applied area.
Right.
And I'm happy that there are these endowed chairs and things that sort of allow people to move things in a way that's clear in its focus and is not so aimed at the application ends.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's what attracted me to the position. There's another sort of endowed chair or endowed professorship position that's really, it's not common in accounting, but it's more common, and those are funded by the profession itself. And so I really enjoy having an endowed chair that isn't so tightly linked to the profession, because it allows me to, I think, be one more step removed from the practicing side of the profession when I'm doing my research. Yeah.
Would in the one that's more closely related to the profession, do they look at your research and have input into that in some way?
There's a good side to that, and then there's a little downside to that. A good side to that is that the firms have historically been very helpful in providing data and in providing participants for your research. So if you were going to do research where you wanted to know how does an auditor make a determination about whether there's an irregularity in a financial report or not, well, then they would actually help line up hundreds of their employees for you to perform these experiments on, and so they, that's been quite helpful. Now, I think that there's also, you work closely enough with those firms that it's easy to take on their attitude about their approach to the profession as well. You just, it's would be easy to become, an advocate or a sponsor as opposed to an objective researcher. So that would be the risk, I think. So those are just issues that I haven't had to face in my particular spot.
Well, I'm on the strategic action committee this year for the university, and one of the things that we're looking at, of course, is we've expanded the term pure research and research to include creative activities. What part of accounting do you feel falls into the creative activities area of research?
Right. Well, I think that if you think about like research as either funded research or as pure research, there is funded research that goes on in accounting, but not that much. So most of it has to do with an individual at their desk with their computer, reading, thinking creatively about an issue that they think would be of interest to them and to others, because eventually you want this published. And then you go about solving that sort of curiosity that you have. So that's what always drives me. When I started my work in public policy, because I was at the University of Missouri, and they asked me to go down to Jefferson City, the state capital, and help with what they call CPA Day, which all the CPAs converged on the state capitol, and we're going to lobby the state legislators about why we needed new laws that protected our profession. And so I went in the ballroom there, and they brought the Missouri Society of CPA Lobbyists up to the podium. This was this stocky old guy with a gray crew cut, a big cigar, plaid coat, double knit pants, and I thought, these people are crazy. Why would you want, I'm sure he's a great guy, but why would you want him representing, a crowd filled with Brooks Brothers suits?
Right.
So then we went over to the state capitol, and I met all the legislators. Never seen so many guys with plaid sport coats and double knit pants and cigars and short gray hair, and then I thought, boy, they're really smart, about this, and this must be a very strategic part of our professional license and our professional managing our professional jurisdiction. So it was that just sort of simple day of my life that has driven, sort of planted the seed for about 10, 12 years of my research in public policy.
Well, I think, that basic idea of a creative activity aspect of this being driven by just the need to inquire further into, information is interesting because I have the feeling, I think you mentioned that the students that come back for their PhDs still have questions unanswered, or they feel like there's something that hadn't been answered by working in the application ends of these things, and they wish to inquire further into those into the big picture.
Sure.
And I think the idea of creative activity and creative end of research that's not funded is part of what does finally drive all applied research. So I'm happy to know that, like I say, the endowed chairs are one of the things that do sponsor that sort of pure research. Can you tell early on in a student's life whether they're going to be one of those people with continuing inquiries, or whether they're going to be happy in just the purely applied field?
Yeah. You get hints at that fairly early on. I think one thing that I've done in designing our PhD program at UCF is start out with a course that's called Research Foundations in Accounting. And the whole point of that course, although we cover lots of the sort of classic literature and things like that, I told them that the one thing that should come out of that course is that they should be excited about one particular area of research that they want to pursue. And it's you get some students who are like kids in a candy store. They have this curiosity, but they want everything, and it's very hard for them to get focused and to actually, put pen to the paper and get on the computer and do what it takes to focus and get a project going that's, actually doable and completable within their lifetime. And then, and those students are easier to work with than the ones that struggle to find the question. Then you have some who, they'll come in and say, gosh, I'm having trouble coming up with a research idea. And that's the student that I worry about much more, because their success is going to be a function of being able to come up with those ideas on their own.
Right. Well, I do think that in some ways being able to phrase a question or come up with a question in both the art end of things and in the business end of things is really the challenge. And to make that, I love your example there of something they can actually accomplish in their lifetime. That's another part of it. It's amazing. I mean, it seems so obvious, and maybe you have similar stories to tell about your department, but it seems obvious that no one's going to get their work published if they don't ever submit it anywhere. But, you do have people who are so. It's not that they're not hard workers. They're such perfectionists. They see all the flaws in their paper, and they're hesitant to get the criticism. And then time will pass them by, and so part of, I think, a successful career in terms of publishing your business research is to make sure that you get it out there. You get you go and travel to different conferences. Go ahead and take all of the shots that you can take from your peers and make that work better, and then start submitting it to the best journals around. And then you have some confidence in it because it's already been shared. Right. Well, one of the things I think is really interesting is my opinion of what should occur at a university is that people should learn how to learn. And part of that, I think, is to build and to help a person amplify their particular interest and learn how to pose questions that will be interesting questions that will maintain their passion. And I think in some ways the culture's attitude of what should go on at a university seems to be maybe different than that. That we have the answers, and that we load this information in a student, and then they go out and can find a job. And it's more a sort of a trade school idea as opposed to what is a classic university idea. And I think the learning to learn is the most important thing we do, because then I think a person determines their own final level. So the people that you run into in the PhD program are people who've learned to learn, and they learn to continue to ask questions, and they ask questions at every level, and finally they ask questions at the MBA level, and then their answers have not been totally all-consuming, but they know there are more questions they have, and they come back at the PhD level. So I think in some ways, I think that's an interesting part of a difference between the perception of the culture of what should happen at a learning institution and what we feel should be occurring here.
Yeah, some of the students that I've seen, they seem to like being a passive learner. You know, they like to sit there and professors are good at, you know, standing up at the front and sharing all their knowledge. You know, and so it does take effort to get that learning to learn aspect of education into an accounting classroom. But I think that UCF's done a fairly good job of that. And then the accounting profession is, in essence, sort of technology and time has almost forced that. I remember when I was an undergraduate in accounting, I studied, we have what we call financial accounting standards, and I think we had standard FASB number 8 when I was an undergraduate. Now we're up to FASB 145 or something like that. And so the book used to be, you know, one textbook this thick. Now you get 2 volumes that are about this thick, and the credit hours haven't changed. You know what I mean? Because we still, you still have to cram all of that material into the curriculum. So it's forced the professors to really, instead of covering the standards, you have to teach students how to learn the standards on their own, because there's too many of them, and they're going to change when they graduate anyway. So learning to learn, it's become, you know, I don't know if I call it a movement, but, you know, but it's become, you know, a way in which the accounting disciplines had to deal with just the volume and flux that goes on in standard setting. Yeah.
Well, since I ran a business, a small business for years, one of the things that I think changed for me, I think, was when a computer came into being and computer accounting programs became readily accessible, and I was able to, you know, really track day by day what went on in my business. And I can see, if you're an accountant, and so much of this that used to totally consume your time is now done by a machine.
That's right.
That it leaves you more time to think about the philosophy of what it is you're doing, and to think about the, you know, we were talking about the ethics and the social implications of what you're doing. I think that's got to be good for the profession.
Yeah, I think so too. There's 2 things. One is we talk about how as a profession we need to, we would call it, move up a value chain. In other words, we used to provide a lot of, you know, standard types of services. You needed lots of accountants just to handle routine transactions. You know, process all the sales orders, all the purchase orders, all the, you know, and there used to be rooms filled with these people. And now, you know, that's all done with a click of a mouse. And so the profession has had to readjust itself into, you know, where it can add more value to a business as a service function. So we do think a lot more.